Well, greetings, Ampaholics out there in YouTube land, and welcome to today's stellar video featuring a rare and wonderful Recording King Deluxe amplifier. Recording King began as a house brand for Montgomery Wards in the 1930s, producing good quality banjos and guitars. But I have a feeling that the manufacturer of amplifiers, like this one, was probably farmed out to other amp manufacturers, and could well be Valco in this case. The Recording King brand was bought out and revived in 2007. So if you happen to go to a nearby guitar center or guitar store, you're very likely to see guitars and banjos being sold under that brand name. Now, don't let this plain front fool you. This is a really nice amp. And let me go to handheld camera. We'll check it out, and you're going to see it has a bunch of very interesting features, and it's really good quality. Okay, so let's get started. First off, it was originally a sort of a medium stained wood cabinet. And someone committed the absolute atrocity, probably when in the 60s or 70s, when these decoupage kits became available, probably from Ronco, and somebody antiqued the face of this and sides, top, all around to make it look, I guess, like a dresser in a girl's bedroom, okay, which to me was very ill-advised. The owner of this amp has not requested that I strip it and refinish it, thank heavens. So it's going to stay this way, but on the inside we're going to change things up. Also, I cannot believe this is the original grill cloth. This looks like something from Mata Hari's fainting couch, okay, so no, who knows where this came from, some fabric store somewhere, but that can't be legit either. Okay, so let's let these two shortcomings kind of move to the wayside, and let's start focusing on the good stuff, like this carved and contoured wooden handle. Okay, that's pretty snazzy. You don't see that very often. Okay, now let's take a look at the control panel. That's where the good stuff begins. Now we're looking down at the control panel, which is located right on the top of the amp. Very conveniently, we see that we have one microphone and 3 instrument inputs. Next, we have a glass silkscreen panel here that says Deluxe Model, microphone, instrument, and tone. And it's my understanding, and this looks sort of radio-like to me because it has like a cloth backing, that this is side lit and actually illuminates when the amp is on so that you can see the adjustments in the dark, and I think that's a really neat touch. We'll have to see if that's true or not. And over here, of course, is the mighty Recording King name brand, model 1016, and warning us, of course, to use only AC. Surely at the behest of none other than Nikola Tesla. There's a real nice ventilated heat shield here that keeps childish fingers from getting in there and getting roasted, and doesn't prevent the heat from escaping. And there are 4 little chrome knobs here. Let me unscrew them, and then we'll see what lurks within. Now, with that cover removed, we see that we have access here to the control panel and to all of the tubes. And looking here in the preamp position, we have some rather unusual 6J7s. These are very early pentodes, so early that the grid is actually connected by a top cap rather than underneath by one of the pins. I think the theory was to keep the sensitive signal away from all the electronic nonsense going on down here in the tube socket, and just bring it in nice and pristine and feed it to the grids of each of the 6J7 pentodes. You also notice that the leads coming to the grids are heavily shielded, with the shield grounded on this shielding cap. I think we'll also see that the metal body of the tubes is also grounded through pin number 1 to the chassis. So we have here a thoroughly shielded input set. The next tube is a more conventional 6SC7, but it's in the metal form, not the glass form. And notice also that this trio is on a rubber-mounted subframe here to isolate it from vibration. So as you can see, this is a well-designed and thought-out amplifier. Both of these tubes actually are 6SC7s, which are duo triodes, and I'm going to bet that the second stage of this one is probably the phase inverter for our 6L6 output tube. Now these are 6L6Gs, but I have a feeling that the amp probably came with the metal encased 6L6s. Right over here we have our rectifier tube, which is a 5V4. Okay, again, a fairly high-grade rectifier with an indirectly heated cathode, so it's sort of like a GZ34 in that it gives good efficiency and also slow startup. So all in all, you could not ask for a snazzier set of tubes than this. Then we can continue downward a bit for these nice louvers that allow cool air to enter, and then we have what feels like a cooling screen here that's been covered with that same lovely material, okay, to I guess enhance cooling even more, and then a place to stash the power cord. Alright, since this is the first Recording King amp I've ever laid eyes on in my life, I'm going to guess that to gain access to the electronics, which I have a feeling are back behind here, we're going to have to undo all of these Phillips screws and then pull all of this out. Okay, let's see if I'm right. You know, before I dismantle it, let's plug this beast in, okay, to the current limiter, of course, and inject a 500 cycle per second tone and see if it works at all. I was told it didn't, but let's see if that's true or not. You can see that the control panel lights up. That's sort of like an alternate to a pilot light so that you know it's on, and also you can see your control settings at night through all the dust. Well, you can see from the light flaring brightly here that we've got some serious issues in this Joule. Probably a dead short in the power supply from the looks of things. So I've got a little sunburn here from that bulb. So let me apply some sunblock and we'll continue. And it should be noted that the only thing that saved this rather valuable and rare old amp from total annihilation just a few seconds ago was the current limiter. So if you don't have one of these, see my video on how to build it, because it's an absolute necessity for anyone working on electronic equipment. Well, this is kind of interesting. If you ever work on one of these, which probably is kind of unlikely, after you removed all the Phillips screws, you can yank all you want on this and it's not coming out. Why, you ask? Because the screws that pass through the handle and hold it to the top of the cabinet also pass all the way down and engage up here on the top of the chassis. So you have to unscrew the handle and pull those big screws out, and then the top of the chassis will come loose. Okay, once those handle screws are removed and you have your truss on to prevent hernia, you can pull this, slide this out and set it down here, which will be a relief. And you can look in and see the Utah speaker with the attached piggyback output transformer and whatever else is lurking in the bottom of the cabinet. Okay, looks like everything's in pretty good shape. One thing that kind of bothered me as I look back here and I see that the filter caps have been replaced. That was my first thought when the current limiter almost blinded me with its flash, was that we had a dead short somewhere in the filter caps. But this may complicate things. We'll have to see. Okay, I've laid the chassis over on its face so that we can see these newly installed filter caps, but it looks like this, and this is odd, okay, many of you probably haven't ever seen this before, but it's a plug-in electrolytic filter cap. Looks like they left that in and just added these. I have a feeling this may be our culprit. Also, look at the size of the power transformer for this Joule. Looks like it's something from Dr. Frankenstein's lab, but you talk about iron, okay, there it is. Okay, and then the components are underneath, and we're going to have to do another somersault here with the chassis to get a good look at them. Well, this is fun. There's sort of a grounding clip from the body of the plug-in electrolytic that comes up here and is soldered to this steel plate. So to unplug it, which is for convenience, you have the utter inconvenience of having to unsolder the grounding clip. Now the fact that that grounding clip still has the original solder back from where the late 30s, early 40s or so, tells me that this is probably an original plug-in filter cap, and you can see no wires have been changed or anything. This, I think, is going to be our culprit. So let me then release this clip, get this thing out of here, and we can check it out. Have you ever noticed how old solder seems so much more difficult to melt than new solder? Well, using the blow torches of hell here, I got the clip loose, so let's unplug this jewel and see what we got. Okay, it's a Aerovox. It looks like we've got 40 and 310s at 450, and it, I'm going to bet you, is an original filter cap, which would be what, about 90 years old? I bet it's a few days past its expiration date. Let's test it with the ESR meter just for a few snorts, okay? I don't think I'll even need the ESR meter. Now, we all know that capacitors will block DC. Therefore, it should present a total resistance to a DC ohm meter. Okay, now I've clipped on to pin 3 and the common ground, which is the outer shell. Okay, now pin 3 is the 40 microfarad cap, and we see that there is a dead short to ground. Okay, we don't have infinite resistance, we got no resistance. Okay, so that's what was turning on the light. Now, this brings up sort of an ethical issue, I think. And that is, was somebody paid to replace the electrolytic capacitors in this amp, and they didn't feel like melting the solder that held this wretched ancient cap in place and just sort of worked around it? I don't know. I don't know the details. I don't know who did it. I'd rather not know. But you've got to admit, somebody paid good money to get this thing fixed, and they sure didn't get their money's worth, did they? Okay, holding the capacitor in exactly the position it was in when it was plugged in, we can tell which pins are which. We see that that's pin 3, pin 5, and pin 7. We also see that pin 3, which is the 40 microfarad cap that was dead shorted, runs right up here and is the reservoir cap for the B plus coming from the rectifier. Now, I just want you to think about the excitement that would have ensued had I plugged this amp into a wall socket. Okay, I think you could have kissed the 5V4 rectifier goodbye for sure. All right, so always use a current limiter and be really careful about plugging in ancient equipment like this. If you don't have a current limiter, don't plug it in. Now this is sort of odd. You have a 10 microfarad electrolytic here and another one right here, and they're connected with this wire, which tells me then that these two wires should be connected, and at their junction there should be a 20 microfarad cap, which is the way I'm going to do it. Okay, because 10 and 10 in parallel are the same as 20. Okay, I've eliminated all the wires that went to the original socket. Okay, I've run this wire over here with the 20 microfarad cap, and back here I've connected the 40 directly to that pin to which it was supposed to be connected, and then to ground, eliminating all of those wires that came across over here. Now let's discuss briefly wiring method. Let's contrast this with the shortest possible leads as opposed to this that was put in long before I got the amp. Now somebody went to great effort to do this. This isn't amateurish, despite the way it looks. This just wasn't some well-intended amateur, I don't think. They put in a metal clip, 2 wire ties, 2 caps, and they used shrink tubing, and they ran the wire up here to that terminal and this wire up here to this terminal. Now, that's not at all the way I would have done it. Look at it. Okay, doesn't that stick out like a sore thumb? It's rather simple to position electrolytics, especially when you have all this room, close to the proper terminals and to ground them securely. Okay, so I really don't care for this, and I really prefer this. But the most absurd example of excess that I'm trying to show you to avoid is, look at this. We have 2 red wires coming from one tube pin. They're twisted as if they were carrying AC down here to what is probably a cathode bypass cap. Then they're running this wire all the way around here to ground the negative end of the cathode bypass cap. What is that? That's over a foot of wire, whereas the cathode bypass cap could have just been soldered there and to ground. Okay, utter nonsense. Now, when I'm confronted with this, my fear subconsciously is, and it's mostly ego-driven, is what if someday they say, oh, Uncle Doug worked on this, and they open it up and see that. Well, who are they going to think did it? Me. Okay, so I can't live with this cathode bypass cap like that. I'm going to rewire it. I'll show you. Okay, before all that wire and even a little clip to hold it. And let's see what it looks like after. Now, what makes more sense? This or this? I mean, come on. What does common sense dictate here, huh? Or does common sense even exist anymore? That's the question. Okay, I can't stand it. I'm going to redo this Rube Goldberg mess here, just partially out of fear that someday someone will look in here and think I did it. Okay, so we'll be back in a second with these wired properties. Well, here's the final product with those dangling participles removed. Granted, there's still some bright blue capacitors up here in the circuit that kind of jar the eye, but overall I think everything just looks much more coherent and correct. Okay, the leads are as short as possible, which is exactly what you want. All right, now I guess the acid test is, let's plug it in to the current limiter, of course, and see if it will work for us. I've got the signal generator pumping a 50 cycle tone in here to the instrument input. Let's turn up the volume. Could it be sweeter? Nope. Okay, no glow at all, not even warmth from the bulb. So it appears that our power supply problem is cured. Now we need to look at the coupling caps and the tube bias and a few other things. Also, I plugged into the microphone input, and boy, does it have some gain. Much louder than the instrument input. Okay, so I guess for single coils you could go in here, maybe humbuckers down here, something like that. Pretty slick. As some of you may have noticed, the capacitors used in this circuit are the famous blue molded caps that you find in tweed and blackface fenders that are held in possibly the highest esteem of any vintage caps I can think of. I'm going to test them now, the coupling caps, to see if there is any leakage, but to be honest, I'm going to be real surprised if there is. And also I'll be looking for any resistors that are overheated. Barring that, I think this amp is probably pretty well finished, after I biased the output tubes, it should be ready to go home. Using the Eurotubes probe, we see that the upper 606 is flowing some current, around 53 milliamps and close to 400 plate volts. That's going to be over 20 watts. Okay, let's switch it off then and check the lower 6L6, which is suspiciously cool. Well, it looks like we have a dead 6L6G here. It doesn't work in either socket. It shows no plate current whatsoever, so I'm going to go in the house and get a decent replacement for it and see if we can't come up with a pair here that will work in tandem. Where's Jack? Jack? Are you in the bathroom here? I guess not. Well, I checked the tube stash and found a really nice pair of RCA 6L6s. These are the metal-bodied first form, the first type of 6L6 that was ever made, and I think that that's what's appropriate for this amplifier. I installed them and checked the bias at 270 ohms of bias resistance and found that they were still running a little hot. So I upped it to 380. Now let's see how they balance out. And using the high wattage resistors that I happen to have on hand, I put a 130 and a 250 in series for a total of 380 ohms of bias resistance. All right, the bottom 6L6 checks out at 34.9, let's say 35 milliamps, 364 plate volt. Now we're ready to take the reading on the upper tube, and we see it's 37.7 at 365. And I've tabulated the results. This will be the upper tube, lower tube. You see the plate current, plate voltage, and plate dissipation is within 1 watt. So I would say that this is a very reasonable value, since the maximum plate dissipation for 6L6s is supposed to be 18 watts. We're comfortably under the maximum, and we're fairly well balanced. So I think this pair of tubes is going to work. From time to time, viewers ask me how to calculate the wattage that's necessary for resistors. So I think this would be a really good opportunity to demonstrate how to do it. First off, since this is a double-ended amp and both tubes are receiving current through that single bias resistor, I'm going to add the plate current together. Now you have to convert it back into amps. So it's 0.0377 plus 0.035, here, it gives you 0.0727 amps. Now your equation is that power, which is the heat that's going to be produced by the flow of current through the resistor, is equal to the current squared times the resistance. Well, then I just square 0.0727 squared times 388 ohms. Now, I know that the resistors say 380, but you want the accurate resistance, and it was a little higher. It was actually 388 when I measured it. Multiply that together, and those two resistors are going to face a total of 2.05 watts of heat produced by the current flowing through them. Now, since each is probably about a 5 watt resistor, I've got 10 watts of power dissipating capability, which is 5 times what I need. So those resistors will be fine. So I hope you see how the equation works and how you feed the numbers into it and come up with the actual wattage that the resistor will be exposed to. And a good rule of thumb is to at least double it. So I would say in this case, if I were using a single resistor, I'd for sure use a 5 watt resistor. I wanted to take a few moments to show you exactly how these grid cap tubes work. As you can see, I just wanted to take a few moments here to show you how these grid cap tubes work. As you can see, there's kind of a spring clip here that's connected to the central wire in a big shielded cable. The shield comes over here and connects to this metal cover. Now the spring-loaded clip is going to connect to this prong right here on top of the tube. That prong is the connection to the grid within the tube. The grid is not connected down here in the normal fashion. It's plugged into up here. Then this metal shield will lock down over that and protect everything. It will keep this exposed grid contact up here from picking up any sort of extraneous noise. Well, the tubes are all in place, and not surprisingly, the blue molded caps all checked out. I noticed while doing the biasing that the plate current and plate voltage values were absolutely stable, so there's no doubt that these two coupling caps are in good shape. So it's time to put the chassis back into the cabinet and do a little audio testing. Well, now we're back where we started, except the amp is working. We've got the chassis secured to the cabinet, that heat shield back on with the 4 thumb screws, and the handle is secured with the 9-inch screws, courtesy of Trent Reznor. Okay, down holding this chassis secure. So I think it's time to turn this around and go wake up Jack and Ollie and have them tune up the guitars. Also, before I turn it around, I think it should also be mentioned that I rewired the primary circuit so that the hot wire would pass through both the switch and the fuse, cleaned all the pots, and cleaned the tube sockets. Well, it looks like Casey just woke up from her 7th nap of the day with her little chili pepper catnip filled pillow. She gets a nice ear rub. I guess we all like that when we wake up from a nap. Okay, Jackie's down here wondering when it's his turn. And there is their mouse over there that's been freshly played with. Okay, so tell the people out there in YouTube land how much you appreciate all the treats they send you. You like those treats? Those yummies? Huh? You like those yummies? I think the answer is yes. Good girl. All right, fans, we're out in the workshop with Jack and Ollie. They're in rare form after 9 hours of naps, and they're ready to thrill us and amaze us with some neat tunes. So grab your beer and let's get started. I guess that about does it for this video on the rare and wonderful late 30s, early 40s Recording King amplifier. I hope you enjoyed our Stray Cat concert and that you will stay tuned for future videos. For sure, we hope you'll subscribe to our channel, and we want to thank those who have not only subscribed but have become Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors and have kept us afloat and on the air for another month, advertising free. If you'd like to join them, there are links in the video description to help you to do so. Now it's time for some extra features. First off, we're going to see what happened to that twin reverb that crapped out during the audio testing 2 videos ago. It's fixed, and the first video is going to show you how it was fixed. And then our second video is going to be the redoing of the interior of the 1932 Ford pickup. Okay, so I hope these 2 extra features will be enjoyable and that you will stay tuned for future videos. Thanks so much. Bye for now. Well, the twin reverb that crapped out during the audio testing in a previous video is now fixed, and as promised, I'm going to tell you what I did to make it work properly. First off, a bunch of viewers said that the 680 ohm cathode bias resistor here for the 12AT7 that drives the reverb was simply too low and allowed too much current to flow through the tube, so I changed it to the 2.2K value that the earlier blackface twin reverbs had. I left the 25 microfarad at 50 volt bypass cap in place. Second, and this is relatively minor, but on the schematic, this resistor to the output and line and recording jack should have been 22K, and said it was 2.2K. I replaced that. I don't think it has much effect unless you're using this output jack. Then finally, and most importantly, the tremolo. The fault with it was that the little opto isolator unit was failing. Now it was flashing. I could see in the end that it was flashing, but it was flashing in a red color rather than the bright white color that we normally see when we look in the end of one of these little opto isolator units. Now the one I got is sealed at both ends, so you can't really tell whether it's flashing or if so what color. But the thing that's most kind of disturbing about it is there are no instructions with this. One end is a resistor, the other end is a neon bulb, and God help you, you got a 50-50 chance of guessing right. I just got to thinking maybe the bright white dot means bright white bulb, so I wired this end as the bulb, this end down here as the resistor, and it works. Okay, it makes all the difference in the world. You get a good solid tremolo oscillation, and several viewers complained it was too fast, so I put another 0.01 microfarad in a parallel with this 0.01, making it 0.02 on the oscillator loop. And by increasing any of these 3 capacitor values, you will slow down the oscillation, and I'll demonstrate that for you in just a second. Okay, so now it's 0.02, 0.02, 0.01. Now for a demonstration of the tremolo, I'm going to crank up the volume a little. I'm inputting a 500 cycle per second tone from the signal generator. Okay, we'll get the volume where you can hear it. Okay, now let's turn up the intensity a bit so that we start to oscillate. That's 5. It's a good solid oscillation, and that's as slow as it goes, which is about 4 beats per second. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 3. Now you'll see the speed will increase in a nice linear fashion, or we can slow it back down or turn it off. Okay, so the tremolo is fixed. And now it's time to box up this beauty and send it back to the proud owner. and I really think he's going to have a good time destroying all relationships with his neighbors. People probably a quarter mile away, because this thing is a monster. Okay, so that's it then for this very abbreviated part 2 of the Fender Twin Reverb revitalization. Well, the time has come to address the interior of the newly acquired Hot Rod, and what better place to start than to remove the old Indian blanket upholstered seats. I don't know if these are from a movie theater or like an airplane or what. These bottom cushions come out. Also, I took off the material covering the door panels. And look at the seat belts I found behind the seats. These are like something you'd use, I don't know, on a B-52, I guess. I don't know. It looks like aircraft stuff to me. Super heavy duty. Real snazzy hardware. Okay, I'm not going to use them because they're just too big and bulky, but I really thought they were neat looking. And very typically rat rod style. Sort of like Mad Max. So, say goodbye to the Indian blanket seats and door panels, and let's see what the new look is. One amusing observation as I'm pulling this Indian blanket away from the Masonite panel, they used a cotton material to kind of pad the Indian blanket, and as I'm pulling it off, this reminds me of Santa Claus's chest. I decided to go with some handmade bomber style aluminum seats that will pivot forward. I put in some high density foam in the bottom and then got some nice black diamond tufted seat cushions, and welded up some brackets here that go in. There's a reinforcing rod that goes under this part of the front of the seat so that it can't droop from weight. That gives me, well, the old seats were like up here and I almost couldn't get my feet in. This gives me an extra like 6 or 7 inches of foot room and just makes the car a whole lot more comfortable to drive. Then as far as the Indian blanket door panel, I haven't done this one yet, but I've done the one on the other side. And I got some material that's a ribbed vinyl that I hope will stay glued to the Masonite panel. Sometimes vinyl's a little tricky in that regard. Let me go over and open the door and give you a close look at it. Now the hardware is not the best. I can look on eBay and maybe spruce that up a bit. The window roller's not too bad. It needs one of those round escutcheon plates here, and this is just kind of ratty looking. But you can see how that nice kind of pinstripe vinyl, I think it looks great and goes really well with the rest of the black interior. Nice little dash in this, and that big old, I don't know what that is, Pontiac or Oldsmobile steering wheel, but it really gives you some leverage. It's like steering a yacht. I kind of like it, actually. I really like the look of it, but it actually works well. Okay, so that's the interior. It turns out that under this seat there was a battery compartment which I've covered with both plywood and black carpet. You can see the edge here of it. And then there's a little stowage compartment under the other seat. Also, as if that weren't enough, there's a 350 watt Kenwood stereo system built into this. It's just incredible. There are speakers up here in the kick panels, and from what I understand they're very high quality, and this system probably sounds wonderful. We'll find out. At the moment I have no input system for the stereo. It had a line out that you would plug in like a smartphone and play your downloaded tunes through it, and I'm thinking maybe get a CD player or something like that, put it under the seat and feed it that way. But that's all down the road a bit. Okay, so that's the new look, and I hope you like it.